Welcome to the Cognitive Vigilance Podcast. I am here with Kyle, Rin, and Saren Higdon.
Higdon, yes.
Higdon, I said it correctly. So Sarah, could you give us like a little introduction, spiel, background, kind of why do people know you on the internet?
Well, I'm a content creator in my own right. I do content across all platforms. I do a Monday night show on YouTube, just discussing news of the day stuff. I dive into news of the day on my Monday show, but I also do just regular content on LGBT issues and just cultural topics as well. I'm also the digital marketing manager for Free the People and a freelance writer for the Post Millennial and Human Events.
Nice. So how did you get into the influencer thing? Like what was kind of like your first topic?
Yeah, it was I'm pretty sure all my topics started off at the trans topic. So yeah, I got into it in about 2020 and I started my Twitter account, I think, in like 2018. So in 2020, I was like, we really need to start speaking out, seeing what's going on with the acceptance rate of trans people and the LGBT community. And it was really, that was kind of when it was starting to divulge into what we're, what we're seeing now is, going after children and what's happening in schools. And I became friends with Ariel Scarcella, who was like one of the biggest YouTubers since like 2009, and we became
I've watched
friends.
a lot of her content. Yeah, she's got good content.
Yeah, I mean, she was doing a lot of big things. She's been around for a while, and so I was talking to her, and I said, "Hey, should I start a YouTube channel?" And she said, "Yes." And so I just started making content, and it's just grown into quite a bit. And then it really blew up last year. My YouTube channel blew up last year. After I was on the Jubilee debate, where me and Blair White were on there together, debating.
What was the topic?
It was trans liberals versus trans leftists, or
trans
leftists versus trans conservatives. Yeah,
I think I watched that.
and so that once me and Blair have kind of become I wouldn't necessarily say friends, but we're friendly. We haven't hung out too much together, but we're cool. And so when she shouted me out, that's kind of blew up my channel quite a bit.
Nice. Yeah, I mean I've watched a lot of Blair White and Ariel's content, and I think what gets murky because I do think that it's very easy for people to lose the nuance with these topics, which is kind of because me and you I wouldn't say we got into like an argument, but we did get into like, I guess, a disagreement on the whole drag thing. That's one that I do think like ends up getting lost in the nuance. Let me bring up the tweet to like bring Rin up to speed.
Oh,
thank you.
Rin doesn't have Twitter. He doesn't.
He's
off the grid. It's very weird.
Not off the grid. I'm just not plugged into the fucking verse the way you guys are.
I do appreciate that you call it Twitter. I'm just saying, I've been dead naming it for a while just because
I'm gonna always dead name
it. They won't. I've said I will until they give me subscriptions. They activate my subscriptions, and they haven't yet for like over a year. So I am not.
So this was the post. I feel like this is going to be interesting because there's going to be sometimes the conservatives are going to agree with me, sometimes they're going to disagree with me, and so it's going to be fun. So this one is about drag queens. I work in the performance industry. Drag queens are not strippers. A lot of them do infuse burlesque into acts, but they're two separate art forms. Drag is an aesthetic, but it's not the same as trans. It's also not inherently sexual. It's also not always cross-dressing. Some drag queens are biological women. Drag and cosplay are very close cousins. I know this is really hard for social conservatives' brains to wrap their head around because art is a foreign concept and nuance is a foreign language, but drag is not inherently sexual. Would I produce a kid-friendly drag event? No, not my style, but could I? Yes. And that's the point I could, which is why I think it's possible for a drag event to be kid friendly. It's not something I would have any interest in taking my kid to, but it's not my business what other parents want to do as long as no harm is being done. If parents want to take their children to a private event where a drag queen reads books, that's the parents' decision. As long as they aren't forcing your kid to attend, you shouldn't give a fuck. This is the libertarian position, whether you like it or not. And what people really got stuck on, because this part, if parents want to take their to a private, I did say private event, which a lot of the drag queen story hours and all those things are publicly funded, which I clearly don't agree with. But I do think it's different. In Portland, Maine, for example, I think it's called Curbside Queens. They have, it's like ice cream and it's drag queens. My friend took their daughter, and they're not particularly woke. Okay. These are like just like normal average parents. Like not, they didn't see anything weird about it. So they took their kids to this event. And I talked to her about it, and she's like, honestly, she wasn't even that interested in the drag queens. Like she didn't really care. Like it. And so I just know that people have a hard time seeing the nuance with this topic, and they kind of look at it as always bad, where I think there might be a little middle ground.
No, I see what you're saying.
I think it's because people see kids involved, and that's where shit starts to get real sticky. And I hate to throw it over to QAnon, but especially with QAnon, despite people thinking that it's like a small deal, there's a lot of people that get really, really into that. And I get, once again, when you bring up kids, people get super, super touchy about that, reasonably so. But I think not all, like kind of like you said, not all drag is inherently sexual. But I do kind of have to ask the question of like, okay, well, why would you want to bring your kids around that? And why would you as an adult want to expose kids to that kind of distortion of reality? And I mean, this isn't my place to have the final say on it, but that's a question that I would have to people who are encouraging or doing these kind of things.
Kyle, how do you feel about child pageantry?
I think that's weird. I think that's really weird.
I mean,
I don't think we should be trying to.
I think child pageantry is worse than the drag queen story hour because
I would
truly
agree.
sexualizing the kids,
right?
You know, like I do feel the same way. I have seen like these drag kids, and I do think that's inappropriate. It's very inappropriate where they like have these young kids doing like drag dancing, and if it was just even dress up, I would be like, okay, like, but like. When they get into the realm of them doing dancing, because I know this, not all drag is dance. Like there's a lot of emceeing, it's a kind of like what would it be called? Like character play where you're just kind of
cosplay.
Yeah, like the Snow White at Disney World, right? You know, there's like a lot of that.
Brandy, do you think kids like elementary school kids and middle school kids shouldn't dance to like modern pop music that's inherently sexual?
So here's the thing: are they dancing sexy? Because the drag kids that I saw are dancing sexy.
They are. It's the typical. It's the typical dance moves, and actually, what you've seen a lot of is it's happening in nightclubs. So they're actually taking them into 21 over clubs and dancing and stuff like that. So it's gotten to be, it's very, very bad.
That's inappropriate. And this is the thing. There is a distinction though between there's like drag queen story hour. A lot of that is publicly funded, which I don't agree with, but I will say most of them are fairly tame in general. And then you get like into like these nightclub things where I think is in the realm of very inappropriate. And then you get to like these like curbside queen things, which seems like extremely tame, you know, where they're just like drag queens standing around and there's ice cream, you know, like that just seems like that doesn't even I don't find that inappropriate at all. So yeah, I would, but the dancing thing I think is where it gets, anytime those are the videos that blow up, it seems to be on like libs of TikTok. Even when the drag queens are dancing in front of the kids, you know, those are the ones where it blows up. And then it's like a brunch where people take their like kids to like a drag brunch where maybe the drag queens aren't aware that kids are going to be there, which then it's like also
then it's
parents' fault.
But it's also, it's listed as all ages drag shows. That's the thing, is all the ones, even where they're like that, it's all ages drag show. There was one video where the queen was like, these big fake breasts were flopping, and then saw the child, was like, oh my God, what is that child doing there? Like there was one of those, but then there was the whole the one that blew up last year was the one in Texas that was it's not going to lick itself in the background.
That was
where literally
club, right?
queens are wearing just pasties and stuff like that and just walking with kids on there, and that was probably one of the worst ones I've ever seen. But some of them, even the music, it's like the way it's just you're right. I mean, so I what I will say is drag, you're right, does not necessarily have to be inherently sexual. I think drag shows are inherently sexual just because that's where they come from. They come from gay nightclub lifestyle. And that's what I kind of said in your post. The reason why I have issues with with drag queen story hours in general is not because that I think that drag queen story hours are sexual. I generally they're not, because usually I think that they've replaced clowns with drag queens, to be honest. Like we don't see clowns anymore reading to kids. We see drag queens.
I like drag queens better than clowns personally, but
I mean, part of it though, and this is why I would say that this is kind of meets the definition of grooming, is because it is, you take your kid to a drag queen story hour, they get used to being around drag queens. Then they see the sign for a drag show, and so they're like, hey, we just saw them at the library, why can't we just go to their show? And then they talk their parents into taking them to see them perform, and that may not be a, you know, an age appropriate show for them, and so that and it does get them kind of just it's getting them used to what should be a nightclub event for adults. It's getting them into that wave. It's kind of I think generally it's the same. It should be it's viewed the same as burlesque, is what I would say drag shows generally are, as burlesque.
It is in the same like cabaret kind of group, I would say, but not like, so if I was going to produce a drag show for kids, I would make all the drag queens dress up like Disney princesses, and they would all just lip sync Disney songs. That would be my drag queen show, like that, and like that would be kid friendly.
They tried that. Remember, there was this tour last Christmas that's what I think it was, and then that turned into seeing videos from that was more sexual. So they turned Disney songs sexual. What's interesting though is the books and stuff that they read. They read like the books that we're talking about, like that we want removed from libraries and stuff, like genderqueer and that stuff. And I remember I filmed at Pride here in Atlanta last October. I filmed the Drag Queen Story Hour because they were reading the hips of a drag queen go swish, swish, swish.
I actually read that because you were like, oh, that's an inappropriate book.
Yeah.
I actually think it was that inappropriate. Like, personally.
But when you listen to the words, it is, again, it's glamorizing it and it's almost like to make kids want to do drag at that point. And these are children. It's not like even we don't know whether they're gay, straight, bi, anything.
Well, you don't have to be gay to do drag.
Well, you don't.
Like, you definitely don't.
Well, like, RuPaul, and this is what I told you too, RuPaul once said being trans and doing drag is like taking performance-enhancing drugs. I know,
it's just... but to be fair, I think that he is also, you know, a little strict there, because I do know like be AFAB queens or whatever. And they're honestly some of my favorite drag queens. But like,
is it an AFAB queen? Isn't that just a showgirl?
No,
like a Vegas
showgirl? because of the costuming, because this is why I say it crosses over into cosplay, because it is like this, like how intense they get into like the costuming is really what makes it drag, you know, and the type it's not even like the sexualness. Like if you in Boston, they have some pretty crazy, I think it's, what is it, like drag gauntlet or whatever, where people compete like on who has the best performance. And they get crazy. Like these outfits are insane, and it's not sexual. It's just like the most, I guess.
There can be aspects of sexuality incorporated, but it's not. I would be interested to talk about the thing you said about grooming. And like I don't know, like I'm super curious because I don't disagree that some of those aspects are leaning towards grooming. I just don't see that as being fundamentally different than other things that already groom kids towards things that are
Jojo Siwa.
Well, I wasn't even talking about that. I'm like talking like music, like musicians.
No, that's Jojo
like,
Siwa is a musician, and
but like,
I think that like just her the way I think that she would be in that realm where she was like this kid-friendly performer, and now she's like very trying to be super risque. Miley Cyrus went through this too, where people they go through like they're trying to get out of the kid thing and go into the adult thing, and they get like really inappropriate really fast. And it's like there's still 5-year-olds that are obsessed with you.
Yep,
like,
yep.
Chill the fuck out. So,
but I mean, I'm not even talking about like that kind of direct kind of thing, like football. Like we have a society that loves to groom kids towards football. Football is super bad for you. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, so,
true.
You know what I mean? So we like, there's all kinds of aspects. Like to me, this is on the parents, right? Like, like we already have a tolerance for grooming towards bad, like a lot of like ballet performers are wrecking their bodies before age 12 to do some of this crazy stuff. And it's like, good for you. Go try to be in the Olympics. Like you're going to wreck your, 20s to however long you live, but shoot your shot. Like Kyle, do you think being a amateur professional musician is kid friendly? Like,
that's true. That grooms you toward, but
that's what I'm saying. Like
the glamorous lifestyle of being a musician,
right?
Like, it's like, those are a nightclub
like,
thing.
The kind of stuff like the shows that we played. There's no sexuality necessarily.
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being a musician exposes you to
sex,
drugs,
and rock and roll, baby.
Exactly. Yeah. Like,
sure, but I mean, honestly, and this is probably going to surprise you. Other than alcohol and maybe marijuana, I very, very rarely see it, and we do play.
You are very unique. Kyle.
Yeah, that's a different.
Hold on. We opened for Steel Panther in 2020. Steel fucking Panther, which if you know who Steel Panther is, you know that they're pretty sexual. Well, yeah, there were some tits at that show, but honestly, that's probably like the most inappropriate show that we played. Other than that, like we do lots of charity shows and like lots of like most of the shows are over 18 or over 21. But aside from that, I mean, like tons of the other shows that we do really don't have drugs. And like, even like when we played the middle of a music festival and headlined the one stage, there really wasn't a lot of like people walking around with their kids, and there really wasn't a lot of stuff that was like drugs, sex, or alcohol. But I kind of get what you're getting at. But I think you kind of I think most people kind of understand that, like, hey, there's like a group over there that you probably don't want to go around because they're probably getting ripped off their ass, but you'll smell weed or something like that. Okay, whatever. But
that actually is perfect, right? There's a whole section of the culture that's bad, and we trust the people going into it to understand that and differentiate. Like it's almost like,
I mean, well, you know what, and maybe this makes me less of a traditionally conservative minded person, but like I don't necessarily think like going out there, if you're at a show or something like that, like, yes, is this drink healthy for me? No, alcohol has no positive health benefits. But that being said, we understand that we're okay with having something more hedonic like ice cream or something like that may not be good for our health overall, but it's enjoyable in the moment. And like I kind of look at weed, alcohol, and stuff like that in the same way, whereas like you're generally not harming anybody. Now if you get behind it, okay, we can go down those rabbit holes, but like if you're at a concert or something like that, you fire up a joint or have a drink or something like that, not necessarily harmful, it's not bad. But if you're getting plastered and you're ruining everybody else's experience or harming people, all right, well, now there's a problem.
I mean, I agree with that. I just think that's the measure. I think that's the measure we should use for drag shows. Is this drag show harmful, or is this drag show fine? Or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know why we have to carpet ban a genre. Like, because I can imagine, That's to Brandy's point, though, not all drag is inherently sexual. I do think it's weird, and I think, like Brandy said, I wouldn't take my kids there to one either. But and
I want, because I wouldn't go to a kid-friendly drag show because I want to go to the ones that are inherently sexual.
Right, but you wouldn't
those
take
are the fun ones.
Yeah.
No, I want to go to those for me. Like I want to go to like one of the fun, like sexy ones. So I wouldn't go to a kid-friendly drag show because it's like, okay, that's like boring. I don't care about that. Like I don't want. That is like clowns.
But that's the thing is, I think a lot of these parents, though, they're not necessarily thinking about the brand. They're thinking, how can I seem, appropriate, like how can I fit in with my friends, right? You have the affluent, it's the affluent white female liberal who is doing a lot of this to fit in with their friend group, and so they're taking their kids, and it's like, to your point, who wants to take their child to a drag brunch with their friends and drink instead of just going out and drinking mimosas with your friends? It's really weird. And then I think most of the people that are going against this, it's you're more shaming the drag queens. Like, why do you want to go from performing in a nightclub to performing to kids? That seems weird, type thing.
I actually think it's more so on the parents than the drag queens, because the drag queens are paid performers. They will perform for whoever pays them. Like, and people like have a hard time understanding this, but that's just like the fact of being a performer. Like, even as a photographer, I will literally shoot anything you pay me to shoot. Like, it doesn't matter. I shoot nightclubs, I shoot children, I shoot weddings. Like, you just pay me money and I will shoot it. So I mean, I can see why. I think people kind of get lost in the weeds there, because it's like, they're like, why would they want to? And it's like, because they get paid. And if there's a market for it and these parents want them to do it, then they will. I think it's more so on the parents. Like, that's the parents' responsibility here to like be able to make the decision on whether or not this is appropriate or not for their kids. And yeah,
would you be happy with like a Surgeon's General warning for a show and then call it like, we don't need laws against this, just fucking have a warning for it?
Well, I don't even think that's necessary. I really just think this comes down to just parents like using their brain. Like, this isn't that complicated, like, I don't but I don't, the reason why I don't have an issue with the drag queen story hour stuff, even though like what you're saying, it's kind of like grooming into the LGBT like culture or pride or whatever type of stuff, though, but even that's still, maybe a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, but that's still the parents' choice if that's kind of the culture they want to bring their kids up in. Because there's a lot of, I don't really like how Mormons teach their kids. Like, I don't really like how a lot of these religious people bring their kids up, but like, it's also not my business. So I'm not going to be like, you're not allowed to do that. I see that kind of in a similar way. This like is a secular way to bring up their kids, and they want to bring them up in this culture, and that's their decision,
Yeah, I'm actually, so I want to be clear. I'm actually kind of with you on that. Whereas I don't necessarily think we need to be banning Drag Queen Story Hour. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I am saying though that we shouldn't have it. I think that it's fine to protest these things. But I wouldn't. That's one aspect where I wouldn't say it necessarily needs to be banned. I think you need to look at some of the people that are putting those together a little bit stronger, because we've had a lot of sexual predators that have put these things together. But I would say I would rather see drag thought of more, like I said, like burlesque cabaret type stuff, and not necessarily targeted towards children, which has been where we're at.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, opinions are always good on that regard. It's always just interesting, because all these opinions we have here feel really like nuanced and like good takes, and I just don't see that reflected in the societal like viewpoint at large, right? Like,
it's either like all bad, all like, this is one reason why I absolutely hate libs of TikTok. Actually, I liked it at first because I was like, okay, this is entertaining, but now I absolutely hate it, because I think that it focuses on the worst and the most extreme examples, and it acts like that is everything, right? Like,
yes, yeah. Well, and that's the problem with a lot of those accounts, like Clown World, libs of TikTok, and
they're very disingenuous.
Well, that's actually the internet. It's the internet in general. Right. That's been always my issue with the internet and Twitter as a whole too, is that yes, it's highlighting the extremes from both sides. That's all you get is the extremes. And when you go out into the real world, most people have these nuanced opinions.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always bring stuff back to nutrition examples, but I mean, this would be a perfect example where if I tell you don't eat this, that, or this, then that sells. But if I tell you, hey, if you like watch your consumption, you generally try to get enough. If I give you the full nuanced perspective, that doesn't sell. But like when you go on Libs of TikTok and you see the most wild shit in the world, of course people are like, oh my God, look at this. But like I think we would all agree and probably recognize that, like, hey, like these drag shows that are inherently sexual, where you see kids grabbing dollar bills out of, you know, the drag queen's underwear, like that is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that's also probably like a very, very, very small amount of them. And I think, like I said, reasonable people would say like probably shouldn't be doing that. But like most of the other ones are probably like just like, hey, that's weird. That's not my thing. But they're not like flipping dicks in people's faces. So would I go for it? No. But if other parents are good with it, then like that's their kids. That's their problem to deal with. But once again, we start getting into sexually explicit events around kids, then I think we have to have a different conversation.
Well, I think that really is kind of the answer, right? Is it's kind of like there's a lot of issues out there that it's like, if you have an event and it turns into a sexually explicit event, then should that club then be held liable for hosting a sexually explicit event that was not advertised for 18 and over? It was actually advertised as you know, for families. So that club
or the producer of the show.
Yeah,
I think maybe it would either be the club or the producer of the show themselves. Usually there's like it depends on the club, but yeah, I would say one of those would be.
You have to ensure
if the parents were not aware. If the parents showed up and were like, "What the fuck is going on?"
If it's listed as an all ages drag show, and parents take their kids to a quote unquote all ages drag show, and then it's a sexually explicit drag show, like that seems to me like it was kind of false advertising. But and then it should be like, wait, you should this event should have been 18 and over. We're gonna hold you accountable for that. And I think that would do away with the problem, because then you wouldn't see these videos. There would not be videos out there, right? And if there was, then there would be restitution for it.
Yeah, I think it would be the producers of the club, the producers of the show, because even the club owner might not know that it was going to be a sexual explicit club. So it's almost not really like the club itself's fault. It would more so be.
But is it the club's responsibility to, once it turns into that, to shut it down?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I at the same time, there also needs to be responsibility on the people who are booking the event and hosting the event. So like, obviously, you know, as musicians, I know Brandy hosts a lot of events as well. Like, you know, as a person booking it, that like you are responsible for providing some stuff or kind of making sure that shit goes as coordinated and as planned. You know, if like, let's say a band was taking too long to break down, or they were putting undue burden on other bands, then it would probably be my responsibility, if I was the host of the event, to tell them like, hey, you guys have to figure out what you're doing here and be accommodative of other people and realize that like you guys aren't the only band playing here. But at the same time, you know, the venue probably does hold some liability, because it's going to damage their reputation as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the best way to handle these things is kind of, I mean, we all hate cancel culture, but it's kind of like you shame that show. You know, I think people have a hard time being like everyone thinks in like broad strokes, generalizations, like all drag queen shows are bad, but like instead it's like, let's focus on these ones that are bad and like make sure that they're not happening anymore.
Well, I think that, and that's what we're talking about here, right? Yeah. And I think it is. I mean, that's kind of what it is. Like everything rolls downhill. As a venue, you have a contract with your promoter that's putting everything together, and then your promoter has a contract with the performers. And so at the end of the day, it's the venue, but when they get hit, then you hit your promoter, then you hit, and it goes down from there. Was it the performer that just went off script? That could change the game too, right? So it could be the promoter now has a gripe with that person. So if like say you got fined, I'm not saying fine or anything like that, but maybe that is how you hold people accountable. But if you were fined for this, then that performer that went off script, maybe they're the ones that are responsible for that. So because they were the one that broke the contract in the first place, there's just so many layers to it, and who actually would be helpful.
But isn't that already the machinery we have in place? Like if a band goes up and it's like, oh, we're playing for like, you know, the middle school graduation, and they just start a sexually explicit show, right? Like that's the same thing. It's like it has nothing to do with drag. It has everything to do with every step of the way is like who's accountable, who fucked up, who's getting fired for this. You know what I mean? Like that,
and it's probably rolling downhill because you probably, to use your example, because then it's going to hit the news, and I've written a number of these news articles, right? It's going to hit the news, and it's going to be this school hosted, and then it's like, is the superintendent going to get fired? Who knows? Or is it that they are going to throw the band under the bus and say, hey, this is our contract, this is what we agreed to, and and so then it really is the free market being like, okay, well, we're just gonna point the finger blame game, and who do we boycott type thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It usually will end up being it seems like almost always.
You know what? Honestly, in some of the recent events like that we saw that were getting plastered all over Twitter last year, I don't remember a single one of those venues. Now I know Ron DeSantis put forth that bill.
That's true. Like how come they never tell us who's the venue, who is the producer?
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like nobody knows. I'm sure. Like, okay, so actually there was an example about an hour away from me, somewhere that my wife and I actually go to a lot. Not like the specific place, but like the area. They actually canceled one of these shows because they said due to like backlash. I shared I wish I remembered it. It was in a town called Cranberry, which is like pretty nice area here in Pennsylvania, and I remember they were like shocked that people canceled. I'm like, it's like kind of like a rural, rich neighborhood, so I'm not exactly surprised that like when you said, hey, we're gonna host this big old drag show, that it got canceled. Like I'm pretty sure it was like an over 21 event, but I mean, still, even at that,
it was over 21 and they canceled it.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay, well, that's
all ages drag shows. We always send out stuff to be like, hey, we don't approve, we're probably going to protest type stuff. Like, tell the venue, but then it's up to them whether they want to go. But it's never over for adults. Like that is the one thing that really gets to the heart of it too. Is I know I've been around the country talking to people, and nobody really cares when it comes to adults. Even with transition, it's all about what's going on with minors. Everything is about minors.
There are some extreme people on Twitter that seem to care about.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, like, this is kind of when I'm like, yes, okay, the extreme peoples on both sides of the aisle is kind of like, you know, you're just extreme, but like normal, everyday people, like I tell people this all the time. I go to events, and it was actually funny because if you're in Pennsylvania, I did an event with Chloe Cole. It was supposed to be in Westchester.
Okay.
And Antifa got the venue to cancel the day prior. And so a church in North Philly hosted us. And I had literal people with MAGA hats coming up and giving me a hug and telling me, thank you for coming here. Thank you for this stuff. So I'm like, all these people that you think would hate trans people always are the nicest people to me in person. So it's crazy.
I know that, but they're always so mouthy on the internet. like
well, that is the other thing.
I agree with you. Like I meet people that like they're like on Twitter and they're like absolutely like horrid, and then I meet them in person and they're just like so timid and sweet, and I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Like,
that's literal.
You're like, what is going on?
That's social pressure, right? Like that, by forcing us to interact in person, you have to like. There's a whole like, you know, social contracts and all these things. The internet takes those away, and you just like
it does. Well, you lose your humanity. You forget that the person on the other side of your words is a person, is a human, and so when you see them in person, or you just talk to people, you know, on a video screen, it humanizes them, and so they're less likely to go after you. I mean, I've almost every situation, it's the same with me too. I know a lot of people that just, you know, you had that situation. I did 2 Jubilee debates, right? And the first one, that one just went off the rails because everybody there is just super opinionated and we'll say what we think and say what we mean. And but the second one of the people that has literally attacked me online constantly, stalked my page, everything like that online, was actually on kind of my side on this debate. And the person didn't say a single word to me the entire time that we were there. Didn't say it before or after the episode, got there, then left. And I'm like, you've been talking all this shit online for so long and you have absolutely nothing to say to me when we're in person. I'm like,
Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes like that anonymous thing. Like, I agree people should have the ability to be anonymous, but if you're being anonymous just so that way you could talk shit and raise hell, I think you're a pussy.
Yeah, I don't take people like that seriously. What
No.
I always find funny is when it's people that are anonymous making fun of other people's looks, and I'm like, you're a coward and don't even show your face online. So what are you even talking about?
It's very true. I had a question. Do you feel like trans and LGBT acceptance has gone down?
Yeah.
In recent years, because I know you just said like you're like, oh, I feel like it's like people are nice to me, but do you feel like in general it's gone down?
Well, we know it's gone down.
Yeah.
We know that there are studies. The stats show it that it's gone down. And I do. And
but do you feel it? You feel it in real life, type of thing?
Well, it's really hard for me to say in real life because I'll tell you, in real life, I don't think I've ever experienced like transphobia or homophobia, but I also live in Atlanta in a very welcoming area, but I've also been all over the South and never once had an issue in person. So I don't know.
Is that metric for acceptance derived from like internet? Like,
maybe it's like, is it people?
So that's, I mean, it's data. No, I mean, it could be, but I think what's happening is the acceptance rate is going down because of what people are seeing online. And so they're seeing all these videos and all this stuff happening, and they're like, wait a second, these people, we accepted them, and now things are happening. So, and part of this too is, I think it's also derived from politics, because so it's I did a report. It's actually like 68% of Democrats don't agree with transitioning children. Like 75% of the society doesn't agree with transitioning children, and yet if you listen to politicians on the left, you would think that it was a consensus among the left.
I think it's because I think Republicans think that like if they can dunk on Democrats for being pro transitioning children, then that paints them as an easy target. And hey, vote for me. It's a disingenuous thing.
Yeah, but like
it's not even Republicans. I was gonna say it's not even Republicans that are. It's actually, I mean, because the Democrat politicians are the ones that are voting unanimously against, like, or voting, and then they look at places like California where they're voting for these crazy bills that would like have CPS come take your children if you don't like go along with your child's given transitions. But and it's the same thing too. Is I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing too is the sports issue. So people are, I mean, like 73% of the population does not agree with males and female sports, yet they're pushing this so hard, and now they're starting to see more and more trans athletes taking these spots away from women, and that's just pushing it further and further and making people just kind of really lose that acceptance. Like, you guys aren't doing anything about this. Why aren't you stepping up and saying anything? This is wrong, and this is absolutely wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. And so I think that does hurt, the acceptance. And then I actually wrote an op-ed not too long ago, and I don't even know if it's necessarily the LGBT community or even I'll say the LGBT community with the original T stand for transsexuals, because the queer community, the people that go by queer, are generally your Antifa Marxists, and they've actually they're rebranded basically.
The term queer.
well, they're basically and that's the thing, is they're rebranded under it's Trantifa now, because what they've done is they've taken queer theory, the mantle of queer theory, which is, it's the same as critical race theory, but it's a critical theory in general. So it's built on postmodern neo-Marxist ideals. And so what happened was, my whole op-ed was about how in 2020 we saw Antifa taking over the BLM riots, and taking over, but what in order for them to push CRT values and the postmodern neo-Marxists that go with CRT, they actually needed Black people to stand out and execute violence and stuff in their name. What's happening now, they found that with queer theory, all you have to do is self-identify into this category. And so you can execute violence in the name of trans and LGBT people. And then once the acceptance rate is destroyed, then you can just self-ID out, and then everybody that's actually trans and LGBT is just holding the bag. And so that's why the Q, I don't acknowledge anything past the T.
Well,
and,
yeah, because the Q doesn't mean anything, right? Because
that's exactly what it is. Well,
you can be straight and be. Ryan's gonna fight me on this, but but you can literally be straight.
There was
call yourself queer.
It's an ambiguous word, and you don't like words that are intentionally ambiguous. I understand.
It's and that's basically what postmodernism is, right? So, and that's where so they changed it from transsexual to transgender, to where transsexual means you have gender dysphoria and you transition from one sex to the other, or to present as the other sex. You can't actually change your sex, but they will say, some of them will say you can change your sex, and it's like, no, that's postmodernism, because there's no absolute truths under postmodernism. And so they change it to transgenders if you don't identify with your given birth sex. And it's like, wait a second, that then is meaningless. Then it's a meaningless term if you can just literally self-ID, or you have a feeling, or it's not based in or rooted in science, right? And so yeah, I mean, that's where we're at with that. And it's really so everything like that. And so they tried to add non-binary to the T as well, and it's like completely separate things. Live your life, do what you want, but you can be gender non-conforming all you want, it doesn't matter to me, whatever. But
because being non-binary doesn't typically involve transitioning. You don't
or there are
sometimes I guess they do, sometimes they do, but it's not really a defining factor of being non-binary.
Well, there's like no gender dysphoria with it. There's because gender dysphoria is designated as an uncomfortability with your secondary sex characteristics and wanting to change that to appear as the opposite sex. Non-binary, and on that Jubilee debate, I asked a non-binary person on the panel, I said, but what's your dysphoria? Like, why are you trans? Like, why are you just not somebody who's gender non-conforming and likes to dress differently? And it really wasn't an answer.
I miss the androgynous people.
Well, that's the thing. There is no gender. There is no gender nonconformity anymore. It's either you're straight presenting, right?
Yeah.
Straight acting, or you're non-binary, or
so
you're
it's
trans.
It is really interesting, and I didn't mean to cut you off. If I did.
No, you're good.
I feel like there are aspects that get like, I think certain, like, I don't even want to call them identities necessarily, but like certain like people in alignment like having a reactionary thing, like androgynous, like some of that is like, I like being in opposition to the binary, right? Like non-binary people are like, you have your binary over there, I like not being a part of that. And then as society shifts to being more inclusive of non-having the binary, those people become less able to self-define because it was reactionary to the existence of a structure.
Well, the queer is regressive. It's regressing back to sexist stereotypes. That's so
And again, I mean, like, given that it's ambiguous, there's 10 people will have 11 definitions for queer. So it's like, it's a whole kind of, it's very hard to pin down what that means. And a lot of it is just,
how do you define queer, Rin?
Mostly people who don't want to be one of the other things, right? Like that, like.
But this is the thing: is you'll have trans or non-binary lesbian. What is a non-binary lesbian? I don't know. You can have a male that's a non-binary lesbian, but no, lesbian actually should mean female. Female.
Right. So I generally subscribe to like the triangle of all this, right? Where you have like biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression, and those you can, what I mean, like you're assigned, sex at birth, but there's so much room to play in a triangular configuration. And I do you feel like you need people who are moving around in that regard to have dysphoria in one way or the other, or is it like, are you like, I'm trying to tease out how much like the difference between people who are transitioning due to dysphoria versus people who are like, I fucking hate that flavor of society and I just want to,
No, I think you're fine to do that. Obviously, I think that self-expression is whatever. I think in order to medically transition, or even this is really where I think it gets a lot of transsexuals, is one, the term transsexual was deemed offensive by these people, by a lot of people that are in the queer community. They said it's outdated and offensive, which now they've said homosexual is outdated and offensive too. But I think it kind of becomes almost offensive in a way where it's almost they're appropriating a medical condition that I have, right? And so if they're calling themselves trans and they're saying they're the same as me, it's almost appropriating a medical condition. But I don't really care what you do with your body if you're an adult and how you present or anything like that, or even what you call yourself. Just don't try to act like you and me are the same when there's a clear definition of what I am. And I don't need to know what your definition is for what you are. I just need to know you're different from me, you know?
Yeah, I would say that the thing is that non-binary isn't the same, right? Like it's just to say that it is a lie.
I have no issue adding
I don't like that part.
I'm like, it can be LGBTNQ, right? Like add an N for non-binary. I don't care.
I feel like the alphabet has there's a version of the alphabet that has that.
It probably.
How do
they
you
just
feel
throw the
about
plus on there.
Yeah.
The like LGB without the T, how people kind of want to remove the T and the Q and everything, and like because it started out really being about sexual orientation, and now it's moving into like gender expression and transitioning.
I understand it. I actually understand why they're doing it, but it is part of that whole like, why is the LGBT together when the T stands for transsexual? We've kind of stood together. We all believe in the binary, the binary system as a whole. So I understand, but that's where I kind of talk about, you know, the T is the first to go. The T is the first that's lost has lost our acceptance rate. We've lost our acceptance rate in our own community. What I always say on the flip side as to why I think, like, people would say, why are they even together in the first place? Well, first of all, because if I'm in a relationship, what type of relationship is that? If I'm in a relationship with a woman, is that technically it's a heterosexual relationship, so it'd be a straight relationship, but presenting to society, we would get treated and be seen more as a lesbian relationship, even though it couldn't be. So somehow we're in the community. Now, if I'm with a man, that's a gay relationship, it's a homosexual relationship, but society would see it as a straight relationship. So either way, somebody's going to see it as a gay relationship and somebody's going to see it as a straight relationship. So I don't see how you can actually separate us from the community. I don't really care too much. I'm actually bisexual, so I fit in the community anyways. So you're not going to remove a lot of us.
Yeah, I would say most transsexuals would be are gay. I think most. I could be wrong here, or bisexual or gay. Right?
It used to be like that. It used to be a lot of gay men transitioning before this big spike. I mean, we've seen a lot of spikes, and now it's mostly
lesbian women too.
It's been a lot of it's been a lot of butch lesbians that would normally just be butch lesbians that would grow up to be butch lesbians are transitioning to be boys, and that's part of the issue why I don't agree with transitioning children in the first place anyways, because we know a lot of them grow out of it, and so if we do that too early, they would grow out of it and they would just grow up to be gay. But with the acceptance growing, we have seen a lot of what would normally just be cross-dressers, like the fetishist, are the ones that are kind of out there again. Now they're saying that they're trans and they're out in the community.
Autogonophilia, which is completely separate.
Yeah. And most of that comes from and all of them are mostly just straight men who want to get their rocks off and go out there. So that is what's seen the most. Like you were talking about before, these accounts that put stuff out there, you're seeing just the normal cross-dressers that are out there putting.
And people have a hard time differentiating. They can't transsexuals and then like autogonophilia and then even drag queens. People put everything in the same category.
Can I jump into a couple of those things? So a lot of this sounds like a flaw in language and not any issue with people themselves, right? It's like classification systems where some people are adhering to old language, some people are like, the language is fluxing too fast for things to keep up. But I do want to come back to so you talked about how kids regret and like there's all kinds of like aspects. If we could predict, like if we could reliably predict who, like if you could improve the gauge for who would benefit from hormone therapy or other sort of like medical transitioning, would you still have a problem with kids? So to me, is it a diagnostic issue? Mm-hmm. Is it a fundamental issue with kids shouldn't be transitioning? And again, I'm trying to come in this from a very like asking questions. Yeah.
Well, I will tell you that, and this is one of those things. Like even a couple of years ago, I would have said I think that we should be looking at 16 with heavy gatekeeping. There could have been a 16-year-old. I don't think that's the case anymore, just because of how much this has become a social contagion and just wanting to be popular with your friends type thing. I just don't think we're there yet. Now, I would still be, with what I know now, would fully be against anybody before the age of 16. I am very against puberty blockers for so many reasons, and a lot of those reasons have to do with what can children actually consent to. And I think this is why I still have an issue with 16 to 18, is because what can children actually consent to? If you go on, we'll just say estrogen as a whole, estrogen sterilizes a male in 3 months. So if you're on HRT, basically you're going to be sterile in 3 months. Testosterone can cause very bad vaginal atrophy and pain and issues throughout the rest of your life. I've just seen it too much with detransitioners right now. And then I've also seen people that are trans having issues with their testosterone. Most trans men don't take testosterone for the rest of their lives. They actually come off of them because it causes issues, too many issues. And then they still present as male. They're just not on testosterone anymore. The problem with puberty blockers now, we do know it's starting to come out more and more. They've never been tested on people in key developmental years. So in your puberty years, they've never really been tested. They've only been tested on precocious puberty to get people to those key developmental years before they actually start going through puberty. And what it really is, the issue is, we've seen brain developmental issues. We've seen other sexual health issues. And even if that child is trans, and this is one of the worst parts, is even if that child does have gender dysphoria and they take puberty blockers, Marcy Bowers, who was Jazz Jennings surgeon, is the president of WPATH, or the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, who makes all these guidances. She has said on video that every child that she has ever had come across her surgery desk to have bottom surgery, if they were blocked before they actually would have started puberty, they are never able to achieve sexual satisfaction as an adult, period. And so you're basically saying that children can, the people that would advocate for this would be saying that the children can consent to a life of no sexual pleasure as an adult without even ever knowing what that could even mean. And so that's why I would be against it as a whole. I think that if you could do it, I think that there could be a conversation for 16-year-olds. I still think that I don't think that 16-year-olds can reliably, consent to sterilization.
I think that if we were outside of the gender affirming care, I think that that's the biggest problem, is that in these counselors and these psychiatrists are going down the gender affirming care.
They are caught.
And it is affirming, right? So like, no matter what, they're not really analyzing, trying to figure out, like, is this really gender dysphoria? Is this like is there a different issue going on? Their whole job is to affirm what their patient says. And I'm sorry, that's not good psychiatry to just affirm your patient. Like, you can't do that.
Well, and I will say 16, the reason why I say 16 is because 16 is the age of consent in most places. And that's the only reason why I would even consider that with
no, I actually agree with
you. But
yeah,
I mean, like 16-year-olds, and I think you guys would agree with this, but like 16-year-olds can't accurately predict the trajectory of their lives. I think and I know that sounds pretty arbitrary, but like, I don't think 16-year-olds have, and maybe agency isn't the right word, but like, I don't think they have the correct amount of agency at that point to determine whether or not they should fully go through with a gender transitioning surgery. The problem is that like, surgery, if you're a male, but even like blockers or something like that.
I think hormones and blockers are almost worse than surgery, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Ways, yeah.
So like when it comes to a male fetus, like the amount of testosterone that a male fetus experiences in the womb actually changes their bone structure as a whole, which is going to once again define them for the rest of their lives. So like I understand why people who, let's say, want to transition before 16, which I'm against, want to get on it earlier, is because you stop some of those changes, especially throughout puberty. But once again, you can't walk up to a 5-year-old and expect them to have full knowledge and consent to be able to change, their bodies for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So, and that what you were talking about before too, the medical industry as a whole, and I just experienced this honestly today, the medical industry seems to be captured with this ideology.
In the United States specifically, you think? Because I know in Europe they're kind of backing away from this. But...
Well, that's the thing, is they are backing away from it. I think that it's interesting because I've heard people say that it is because of our open healthcare system that is more open to predatory behavior, but I don't know. I see it's worse in Canada, and I think that there's reasons for that, and I think I don't know. I don't want to get. No, I've said this on YouTube. This is kind of where I can start to put on tinfoil hats a little bit too. And if you see the people that are transitioning young, most of them have other comorbidities, high likelihood of autism, and there is a case to be made that there is some eugenics at play. When you're looking at some of those major organizations. But I'll tell you what I experienced today. So I am currently going through, I'm looking at possibly getting diagnosed with ADHD. I talked to a therapist today, and when they were like, oh, what are there any other health conditions that we should know about? I'm like, well, I have gender dysphoria and I've transitioned. And the guy was like, oh, I think we all have that. I don't even know why that's in the DSM. What? Excuse me, what? Okay, I'm glad you didn't Google me before our my pinned tweet on Twitter is like why I was kicked off Twitter for a little bit, for saying that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition.
Sorry, you got to deal with that. That sucks. But I want to jump back to some of what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I'm a chemist and I work in pharma, and a lot of what you guys were just talking about sounds to me like bad medicine, right? Like the medicine isn't there yet. Aspects of like sterilization, aspects of like just like raw hormone dumping. To me, like if we had puberty blockers that allow, like, had better down the road, physiological like outcomes, like would you still be opposed to it, or is it like one of those things where the tech's not there yet?
Well, if it truly was fully reversible, and actually certain things could develop, like brain development didn't deplete. That's one of the other things that people it's squeamish to talk about, but it needs to be talked about, is that for a male, the primary sex organ doesn't develop, and so you have a micropenis. And so then if you do end up going to so if you don't transition, then you have a micropenis for the rest of your life. And if you do transition, then they have to, and you go on to have bottom surgery, then they have to take from your colon. And anytime you graft from anywhere else on the body,
the Jazz Jennings thing is so fucked.
Yeah. There was somebody that was in the original Dutch protocol study that said puberty blockers until the age of 16, and then hormones at 16. Died in 2017. It was kind of hidden until Mia Hughes wrote about it with the Post Millennial last year, 2 years ago now. And yeah, it kind of was exposed, but it was because they grafted from the colon, and that created bacteria.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like any kind of like major graft is like, has a major like failure risk and stuff. Yeah.
And so if there were things that, if the gist of stuff developed properly, there would be something. If the medicine was there, then yes, possibly, then you could say that might be,
if it was reversible. But the issue is that it would be really hard for me to imagine that, like, these changes, these chemicals are obviously meant to create changes or to prevent changes, right? So like, how would you make it so that they would be completely reversible? It seems like you'd get to a point where you couldn't
Well,
really.
so interestingly enough, like what puberty blockers and hormones are massive hammers for incredibly fine, like, you know, precision, like chemical gradients. The tech we have now with gene editing, mRNA editing, and a lot of the like aspects in that, we have much more fine tooth like tools, and you can operate in specific tissues. You could like, so like now you could likely do puberty blocking in literally individual tissues, if not individual clusters of cells. And like, you know, the tech isn't there yet because that tech is being used for, you know, rare genetic diseases. And then we're just now crossing the line from shit that had no other fucking hope of doing anything other than multiple like organ transfers, or just, oh, you die with this disease. Like now that's moved forward to now we're like, oh, maybe we don't need to give people statins all the time to like combat heart disease. But like we are on the verge, if not in the middle of a medical revolution with personalized medicine. And so like, go ahead. I don't.
No. I was just gonna say it's interesting though too, because if we're on the verge of this revolution, at what point is it though that we don't really need to be looking at like puberty blockers and stuff like that to get it in there early? And at the age of 18, we can reverse all these changes, so we can actually make it easier to change the body after 18 instead of stopping stuff early. I don't know.
The tools to install switches later in life exist and have for a while. We're just not allowed legally by any country's like legal genetic engineering to put those in place. And because a lot of this comes hand in hand with like designer babies. So like it's really gets really interesting because the tech is there, but well, let me rephrase that. The crude forms, like the crude ways of using the tech is there, but we're now coming about it in a much more elegant way. And I think that'll be the thing that lets us cross the line, as opposed to like literally putting these like weird mechanisms inside your DNA from like an egg embryo state and then like manipulating them. But it's there. Like we can,
What's interesting is you talk about designer babies, and it is interesting because people always ask like, don't you think that we would know if somebody was trans based on their, you know, genetic code and all this stuff? And you probably can. I mean, there's been some genes that are anomalies. There's been 20 different genes that have been seen, but there's no appetite to test that, because if you can then test that, then what happens is then you can do testing in the womb. And this is why they stopped doing it for gay people. They stopped even testing for the gay gene back in the 90s, because they assumed what would start happening was if you could test if somebody's going to be gay, then you would have a lot of people having abortions for gay babies, and then it would just eradicate gay people.
So I can speak to that as a geneticist myself. It's unfortunate because there is like the human genome is incredibly complicated. Like alcoholism, there's a genetic component to alcoholism, right? You have a 0.01% chance of accurately predicting genetic alcoholism from the genetic. Like if you look at someone's like genome and you go, you can say with 0.01 confidence, like 0.01% above the norm. But it's because there's millions of people, that's statistically significant. So it's not one of those things where it's like there's not a gene for alcoholism. There's a bunch of factors. And when you do the math, you can be like, this person's going to trend that way. And I you know, I'm not up to date in this specific area of the research, but I know that people are still looking into it because of the medicinal. Like people want, like scientists want to be able to help people and improve people's lives. And the like we thought, like I was always like present for the mapping of the human genome, and we were really excited. And then we like mapped it, and it was like 100 times smaller than it was supposed to be. And we're like, well, what the fuck? And everything is doing all all these genes are doing like 6 or 7 like times the jobs. Epigenetics matters a whole bunch. There's a whole bunch of other, and we're still like translating the language of human genetics and DNA from like the Rosetta Stone and its hieroglyphics. And we're like, that one's a picture of a dude with a dog head. And if you put that here, that means this, maybe, probably. And so it's like, the language is so complex. And I'm not worried because like environmental influences and like aspects of that, like I don't think we are slaves to our DNA as much as people think.
Right. And
oh
actually,
my God, we need to have Rin to argue with Jeremy Kaufman. That would be so
who's Jeremy Kaufman?
He's a libertarian who's like
He's
very
great.
very
I love
he
him.
believes that nature really determines everything, like everything.
Really?
I can literally point to proof. I can literally point to proof where that's not the case.
He's very much that like nurture is way less important.
Ask him about armadillos.
No, I'm actually gonna have you guys. I know this is happening. Like I'm already like
listen. Ask him about armadillos.
Like, this is happening. We're getting you and Jeremy on. It's gonna be great.
Go ahead. I'm done.
No. Well, it is interesting though because like Deborah So, if you know who Deborah So is, sexologist who's researched a lot of this stuff too. In her book End of Gender, it was so crazy. She got canceled. Like the left attacked her a lot as this transphobe for putting out End of Gender. When you read the book, it's one of the like most pro like LGBT books out there. She actually explains how they've kind of found that there's a chemical imbalance in the womb that can cause homosexuality, and it's more likely for siblings to be gay. So if like one male sibling is born first, it's because it's a testosterone that's added when a male sibling when a male is in the womb, and so that gene never leaves. And so if it never leaves, then the next siblings after that are more likely to be gay. And so they've kind of deem that. And I've always kind of said, and it's kind of like when we talk about that, it seems like that could very well have a lot to do with the trans stuff too. It's the same type of chemical that you're born with. Because I've talked to people when you talked about like when you're 5 years old, the reason why they get that number is because every transsexual I know who's happy in their transition all have kind of the same stories. From the moment that they became self-aware, they knew that they were, there was something different about them. They wanted to be the opposite sex, and there was it's very common. I mean, I was like 4 years old when I, started realizing this about myself, or can even remember that. But the problem is it's a lot of people think that because we all have had good results and we knew it at that age, then the kids at that age know. And I'm like, it's kind of the square is or the rectangle, or it's like the square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. And so like just because all of these people that grow up to be adults and are happy knew at that age, it doesn't mean that everybody at that age that is going to know, or that shows gender nonconformity is trans either. And we know that because like 90% of them grow out of it by the age of 20. So
I mean, but again, so I don't disagree with a lot of the inherent aspects of that, but to me that's a diagnostic thing, right? Like, so like if diagnostic because there were points where we were like, oh, like this kid, like, we used to have very inferior diagnostic things that we would try all kinds of horrible stuff and it would get better over time. To me, I worry about easing off. Like I want to make sure like medicine and like, behavioral care and all these aspects are people minded first. And I'm very fine with compromise. Like to me, like we should be very like testing new medicines and new, like behaviors on children is the hardest thing to do. And it should be, right? Yeah. So to me, I'm fine with being extremely cautious, but I'm not fine with writing things out inherently if there's a chance to help people, right? Like, so.
Well, what's interesting is actually every single bill that has banned puberty blockers and hormones for minors also has an exception written into it for extreme circumstances to conduct clinical research on. So it's very rare, but it is allowed in every state in this country for clinical research.
Which I think is great.
And that's how it is in Europe too, is that it's like in UK, Sweden, and Finland it's like it's okay for extreme cases. And I think when people are like, oh, this is like people that are against this are all like these right-wing people. And I don't know. I don't consider myself like right-wing. I guess it depends on who you talk to. But like Sweden, I don't think that's like a right-wing country. Finland, these are pretty left-leaning to center left, and so the fact that and I watched a documentary on Sweden that it wasn't just about about puberty blockers or hormone treatments. It was also about just gender affirming care in general and how they were moving away from that, which is what I think is a huge problem. That's like the big problem here. So is the affirming
you're starting with a diagnosis and you're working your way back, right? You're saying, how do we get to this diagnosis from where you're like, this is what's going on.
So Brandy, to your point, I'm not disagreeing with that at all, Sarah, but those countries are famously very controlling of their medicine, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a whole kind of like socialized medicine kind of issue, not necessarily like a right-wing, left-wing view to my mind. They are very like, okay, we have a board that like, what's the medicine we're going to have for this treatment, or what's the treatment we're going to have for this sort of thing, and then they just collectively decide. And it's just very like, Europe is big in that in general as well. Like, in order to get, like, if you have a certain disease and there's 3 medicines in the United States that are like maybe an option, and in the US the doctor will try all of them until they find the best one. In Europe, you don't have that option. You get whatever one the country says is the medicine we use. And you can eventually get the other one with like years of like shifting around, but it's a whole, like, the way they because we prioritize efficacy at the expense of cost. So like, American healthcare costs a shit ton more, but you get a lot more options and doctors will try a lot more things. Europe, healthcare is a lot cheaper, but you have way less options. That's just kind of the way.
But that's not really why, because they did use gender affirming care, and these things were given to minors, and like that was okay for a little bit, and then they backed off because they noticed that that there were negative effects and that kids were growing out of it, and that it actually wasn't getting rid of their gender dysphoria.
Right, so, but what I'm saying is that's a controlling aspect where, like, and in the US, our culture is more inclined to be like, let's let the parents and doctors decide, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
which
the country
is the argument people make is like,
correct,
it's the parents.
Right. No,
they were doing a lot of experimentation. I mean, it was a mass experiment on children in a lot of those countries that they were doing. They were experimenting by just giving. And then now they're seeing the detrimental effects. It's like, I'm not going to say the other word that we all experienced on a global scale a couple of years ago, right? That was a mass experiment on society. But it's interesting because...
I'll make that, by the way.
No. So, but it is interesting you talk about that too, because the Dutch protocol is what kind of set this whole thing in motion. So the Dutch protocol was created back in the 90s, I think, and it was what they were starting to use with puberty blockers and everything like that. And it's interesting because the study that they did with the Dutch protocol they've never been able to replicate it. So they've never been able to replicate the results that they got from it. Also, when we started just putting everybody on puberty blockers to say, hey, we're going to stop your puberty and give you time to think about this, the Dutch were like, that wasn't at all what we had planned. We wanted you to do like heavy gatekeeping to even get on puberty blockers. And now they're just like, we're just going to we're going to put you on puberty blockers first, and then we'll just give you time to figure it out. It's like, no.
I absolutely think.
Because what they started to see, what happens when you do that is 90% or something like 99% of the kids that go on puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. And I called this the sunk cost fallacy because, and this is the same reason I'm okay with social transitions, but it's not a zero-sum game. Social transitions, if you still start calling somebody a different name, different pronouns, there is a sunk cost into that. People have already started to accept you. So then to say that you're not what people have been like, all right, making these concessions for you. It's very difficult to go the other way with that. And so,
I mean, that's super fair, but I want to put out there that I think that these medicines and these treatments are incredibly powerful and should not be done in any kind of easy way. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I got what you're saying. I get you. Yes, for the audience, at least everybody knows. Yes, I don't think anybody here is advocating for it to be over the counter, off the shelf. Well,
I mean, maybe they get to a point, right? Maybe but maybe there's so to me as a chemist, maybe there's a point where they're so safe and so effective, and it that's a level of engineering. I don't know that I'll live to see that. But that's in order to get to that point, like we have powerful medicines that are over the counter that 50 years ago, it's wild to think that would have been something that we could do and just like go in and
These are token mad scientists, by the way.
I just, you know, I feel like during the pandemic, I was constantly having this conversation with Brandy and all these peripheral people. I'm like, I know all kinds of scientists. All they want to do is help people. Like, I don't know any scientist who's like, I'm going to fucking ruin the world. You know, anyway.
I do think that profit gets involved, though, with certain things in regards to pharmaceutical companies.
Sure, I agree completely. I agree completely. But most of this, like, even I used to work in the same building as Monsanto, right? And they're easily have some of the worst, worst business. It's just like an easy villain company, right? Like they do evil shit, and I love to see it. But the scientists were just like, we're gonna solve world hunger, and we've built this technology. And then that guy took our world hunger solving technology and started like suing farmers in the Midwest. Like I'm like, I don't know how that. Well, I don't know where that happened, but I made this thing that could solve hunger worldwide, and they took it away from me.
Well, I kind of say the same thing with a lot of the people out there. I think that this is where people miss the boat because they're so busy just fighting the other side. They don't realize, I think that both sides think that they're doing what's best. Most people think that they're doing what's best. I think that just some people don't, like, they're misguided. They don't really see some of the full ramifications as to what they're doing. So I do think that everybody kind of thinks that they're doing what's best. I think that there are some evil players out there that are playing off of it. But it's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily even, this is one area when it comes to transitioning children, I think parents even have a lot of grace, because what we've seen is, this is where it's a little bit different, is because a lot of these parents are being manipulated to say you can either have a trans child or a dead child, almost as if it's a foregone conclusion. Most of the time they're saying that in front of the child. So then you put this idea into a child's head. And so they're being manipulated in a lot of ways. But even the doctors that are saying that, I think they've been kind of bought into that this high suicide rate, that it's almost a foregone conclusion. So it's hard to really tell what's actually happening. But like I told you before, I do think a lot of this medical industry, I just think they're captured. I think a lot of the mental health industry is kind of captured by some of this ideology. It's kind of hard to see.
Yeah. But in regards to what you were just talking about with like the parents, I do agree with you that I think a lot of them are misinformed. I think a small percentage, though, is like Munchausen syndrome by proxy. You know,
I think that Transhausen by proxy.
Yeah. I think that there is a small percentage of that happening because, like, obviously, it kind of makes sense why there would be that, you know, because that is a small it's a small percentage of parents anyway. So like you could see how this would just be a new form of that. Like, so I think that that's a chance of this, but I think most parents are just misinformed. Want to do what's best for their kids.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I'm quoted in a Southern Poverty Law Center article about gays against groomers, where I say exactly that. I think that there is a lot of Transhausen by proxy moms who they've been, and we've taught, you know, a lot of these leftists think that they believe in the CRT, they believe in this stuff. So we've been telling them that there's this oppressed versus oppressor status, where you that no matter what you do, you're always going to be an oppressor just because you're affluent white female, right? Because of your skin color. And so they're seeing this as a way to say, look at how good I am. And now they're putting their kids into this oppressed status. And so I think that there is quite, unfortunately, you see it in the Facebook support groups, that the moms are like, my child didn't want to do this today and I had to make them do this. And it's like, wait a second, wait, no. What? But you see it. I mean, so there's definitely quite a bit of that.
And see, that is, in my opinion, child abuse. But I do think that people get lost in the weeds here. Well, they'll be like, all of these parents are child abusers. And I'm like, well, I think some of them are just probably confused and don't know what to do, and they're trying to do what's best for their kid. But I do think what you're talking about, that would be under the category of child abuse. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is child abuse, when people used to like get their kids sick so that they could take them to the hospital and get sympathy. Like that's child abuse.
Well, it's what I mentioned earlier, the AWFL. the affluent white female liberal.
Yeah. I mean, God, I don't know how to fix that.
I don't either. It's the white knight saviors. It's the same people that call me transphobic for saying what I say online. I'm like, excuse me? Like what?
Yeah.
Black man or self-hating.
Kyle, your audio is way
You're
down.
very quiet, Kyle. Is that why you haven't been talking? Because we can barely hear you.
No. Hopefully you heard me.
No, you're like really quiet.
Oh yeah, it's like you're like barely coming in.
Oh, someone said repeal the 19th, Brandy. Oh my God.
But that's
honestly, I don't even care. Just get rid of it.
Going back, kind of talking about the the medical industry too, and even the people who think that they were doing good. Like we talked about, like so Free the People this week, we released a documentary or the first episode of a docuseries on the Blaze TV called The Cover Up, and it's talking about the COVID stuff. And Matt Kibbe's talked a little. He in his interview with Glenn Beck about this. He said, he thinks like a lot of the gain of function research stuff that was happening was a lot of people who thought that they could actually, with enough hubris, that thought that they could actually do this. They were smart enough to do this and not have something bad happen at these mad science experiments, thinking that they could stop a global a bioweapon from taking place from one of our adversaries. But obviously I don't, I think people look at that and go, that's super dangerous. Why would you ever create these viruses?
Well, we don't need to jump into this too much, but I am curious about, because like the gain of function tech is interesting, but it's much more difficult to implement that safely, which is why because I work at a company that turns things off, and so I work at a company that is like adjacent to Moderna, but I also work with RNA like molecules, and I'm an oligonucleotide chemist, and I synthesize things of that nature.
Okay, so it's actually, most people don't know this about me. I don't even know if I've really talked about it. I was a warehouse manager at a company that's fairly well known that does clinical trials, and so we had labs and stuff like that, but we did more test tube stuff. So I don't know about the creation of vaccines and stuff like that, but yeah.
I actually don't. I'm not a CRISPR specialist. Like I'm the predecessor tech to CRISPR. I expect to be wiped out by CRISPR tech and or have to transition. But
to the important point though is, do you know how to create LSD, and can you?
So I have in many. Yes, I know how to make it.
Oh, God damn it!
Do you know how?
We're on YouTube right now.
Knowing how as a chemist is very different than making.
Yeah, actually, I knew a chemist at one time that he was like, "Yeah, I know how to make meth, but obviously, I'm not going to."
I can't tell you the number of times I've been at parties and like just hanging out with people, and somebody's like, $40,000 if you make me, so and so like batch of this at this scale, and I'm like, listen,
make me some really good MDMA, Ren. Come on.
Yeah,
I mean,
there you go.
That one's a little bit easier because you can get the precursors for MDMA from trees.
Yeah, sassafras.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
knew it.
Saffron oil. Saffron oil, and it's,
I know my drugs,
dude. If you want to just start chopping up the roots of sassafras trees, I can fucking just give me a couple of baskets of fucking saffron root, sassafras root, like tubers, and I'll take it from there. It's really the problem is I can order stuff, but if I don't have a reason through my job to have those things, I go on a list and I can't do science anymore.
Oh, okay. I guess that's a little risky. The last thing I wanted to talk about, Sarah, was, so did you help? Were there bills that you were working on or something in regards to the transports issue? Was that?
Transports. I've worked on it with some of our lawmakers down here. We already kind of have a bill in Georgia. I actually lobbied for the ban on cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers. We didn't get puberty blockers. We only got cross-sex hormones and surgeries for minors in Georgia, but I lobbied on that bill to get that passed here in Georgia. I also I lobbied it from afar. I wrote letters and stuff for the lawmakers in Louisiana to pass their bill. And then I also consulted and helped write the Louisiana version of the Don't Say Gay bill. I helped write that bill. And it was mostly to say that what the bill basically did was that parents had to opt their children into sex ed courses that talked about, or any course that talked about gender and sexuality. They had to opt their children in instead of an opt-out system, which is in the system. And it also required written permission from parents before a school could change a name or pronouns for students. And it's interesting because I did tell the lawmaker, the first thing I told her, I said, honestly, if I don't think that I said, honestly, I would rather y'all just pass school choice so that parents could go and take their kids to woke schools if they want. They can just take their kids wherever. They can choose their schools. But if you're going to pass this bill, I want to make sure it's all on the up and up. So that's exactly what I did.
Oh, okay. What's interesting is that I grew up in a very religious family. And so I went to public school in middle school. But I remember they did tell, like, this wasn't gender stuff, but like sex ed, they had to like tell all of our parents that we were taking sex ed because my mom took me out of it because apparently she didn't want me to know anything.
It's kind of understandable though, you don't want people talking about, you don't want random teachers.
I don't know what sex ed is like. I've never been, so
I mean, I loosely remember hearing about condoms and penises and vaginas and how easy it is to knock somebody up. I'll tell you what, man, I can't say I've tried, but I'm sure it's easy.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this quite a bit. I actually think I think that I personally think that sex ed classes should simply be a biology class, and like this is how you get pregnant type stuff, like not like actually describing what things are. That's everything else other than biology is pretty much up to the parents to teach their kids anyways, I think. And so, but
wait, do you think parents really, a lot of parents don't want to teach their kids that? So I do think that there is
that's why the opt-in system is good. I think that's why the opt-in is fine because and it is, just have a permission slip that if you want your kids to do this, you give them a permission slip and they've signed off on it. I have no issues with those things. And none of the bills I even think have even changed that. We had a bill that I did testify on a very similar bill here in Georgia over the summer. I don't think we didn't get it passed this year, but like, it's like these bills, and actually the one in Louisiana made it through the legislature with a veto-proof majority. The governor vetoed it, and then they never went back and
working on it.
Overrode the veto. But they did override the veto of cross-sex hormones down there. So it's just really interesting how some of these legislatures work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it is Pride Month, which is why we're doing this episode. And also,
I completely forgot all about it. Brandy, you were right when you said conservatives really bring it up a lot.
They remind us all the time.
Yeah.
But so in regards to that, Chase Oliver, who is now the Libertarian candidate, who has made a lot of people that are very conservative very angry. He's gay. I've actually gotten into a debate with him briefly about Pride. And I've actually talked to Rin about this too, in regards to public decency and pride parades and all of that stuff. And my whole stance is that I don't think kink should be involved in Pride. Rin is going to have a very, very interesting argument on why it is.
It's just historically, yeah.
I know, but my issue is that I think it actually ruins the
the family
it makes being gay be perceived as a kink.
Yep.
It's correlating these two things together, like being bisexual, being gay, being a lesbian, all starts to become seen as a kink. It's mixed with this, and then it's like perceived as degeneracy. It's all about sex. Before it was like, oh, like you love who you love. It wasn't about sex. Pride, I don't think, was meant to be about sex. Maybe y'all can correct me if that's not the case, but I just remember it being like, let people love who they want to love, not let people fuck who they want to fuck. Like I don't like the fucking that wasn't really involved. I thought it was mostly about just having people be able to be in relationships with who they want. And then when you mix it with sex, now you're kind of devolving it into just like this degenerate kink.
Yeah. Well, historically, like you were saying, historically, I think it's been kink and been out in the open to make people uncomfortable, but also to be like, hey, we're here, right? And it was until 2015 when gay marriage was legalized, there was a reason for Pride. And then what happened is all the normal gays left, and that's why you're seeing such degeneracy now. Is because it's just gone overboard, because all the normal gays are like, hey, we got what we wanted, we're gonna go, and then you have these activist organizations just move in and take over everything. And I'm with you. I think I've long said that you can have kink at Pride, or you can have kids at Pride, but you can't have both.
Why can't they just put the kink separately? Like have that at like a nighttime thing.
That's exactly what I've kind of said too. Well, if you want to have a family, that's what I said. If you want to have like a family Pride and you want kids to be allowed there, then you have to just, public decency laws have to be set, and then just go to the nightclubs at night.
So what level of all right? So I will. You're right. You called me on it. I'm gonna jump in. So for me, right, like the history with Pride and leather and kink is very like no one else would stand with like the gay community in the early days of Pride. That was a like, hey, we're like straight, like white people who also have our own shit in the closet, and we're going to come out because we're not persecuted nearly to the degree that you are. And so the history of Pride and kink was like the leather community, the kink community was very like early ally. And so there's a lot of pushback from like the old timers who are like, whoa, what the fuck you mean we can't come to Pride? Like, we were your first fucking allies. We stood up with you. Like, we're the only ones. And then we got them. And now that like Pride is a family event, like all of a sudden you want us, to go back in the closet. But I actually understand like the degrees of it. But see, this is one of those things where it's like, are you mad at the implication of sexuality, or are you mad at sexuality, right? Like somebody walking around with a strap on and a fucking like somebody in a puppy mask on all fours in front of them is an easier argument to make versus someone wearing a collar, right? Yeah. Like, are you mad at somebody wearing a collar walking in a Pride parade? Because to me,
you know that it's a little bit more intense than that. Like,
I understand, but so what's the line? Like, what's the line? Because we take children to the fucking beach, right, where people are wearing fucking skimpy bathing suits, and it's like, why is like chaps, like why is it? So to me, what is it about sexuality that is inherently bad, and how does it have to be framed, right? Because if it's fashion, that's a totally different beast. And to me, kink at Pride is fashion, and I don't know why.
I think it depends on like the sexual connotations of what they're doing. A lot of times, like I mean, obviously these are the things that like libs of TikTok shows you the worst of the worst, So like you get the worst things that have ever happened at Pride is on libs of TikTok. And it'll usually be like these like mostly naked men like dancing around like.
Is a mostly naked man inherently problematic to a kid?
I think it's more so the gyrating and like
the
sexual emotions.
I think all reasonable people would say that swinging your dick in front of a kid's face.
I agree, but it's illegal to swing your dick around. So if they're covered up,
but that's the thing is that's what's happening though, is they are kind of voiding these laws specifically for like Pride parades, because we've seen people just be naked. I mean, pictures of people naked in front of children and stuff like that. It's kind of, and actually it was interesting. Yeah. You talked about Blair White's channel was, her video got demonetized, I think last year, or maybe even removed off YouTube, because it showed a video from a Pride parade of somebody in the back of a truck bound and tied and getting whipped. Like, and so it's like acting out the fetish in the parade itself. And Blair's whole point was there's literally children right there, you can see them in the video watching this, and then it was like they removed it for sexual conduct. She goes, actually, I'm glad they removed it, because it proves my point that it's not good enough for YouTube, it's not appropriate for YouTube, my adult YouTube audience not appropriate for children. You know?
I mean, I'm gonna have no problem with people being like, yeah, there's a line to cross, and I haven't. But like, so removing kink from Pride is very different than let's not tie people to the back of trucks and whip them. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
my argument for removing kink at Pride isn't just because of the kids. It's also because I think that it like it devalues what Pride is and the whole point, and the point that it is about love, not just sex. And I think especially right now, a lot of people that I see, I know that you're not on like the Twitter, so Rin doesn't have to see the worst of the worst of the collective consciousness, but I see it, okay? And like
the things my mental health intact. Sorry,
I know I'm jealous.
Yeah, you do.
But I think that people are starting to see being gay as being, we're regressing to this point. Where the fact that we're getting to this point, like where people are like, all gays are just sexual degenerates. Like we're back to that because of this. I'm not gonna say it's just because of the merger of kink and Pride, but I think that there's a little tie there because people are being like, okay, well then it's like you're associating it with sex. Not just we love each other.
To your point, you do see this a lot now where pretty much people say, oh, well, all trans are groomers, all this person. And it's really to the point now where like, I'm pretty sure you even saw
people are calling Chase Oliver pedo for like, and I'm like, bro, chill. Chill the fuck
like
out.
Cenk Uygur is calling everybody who disagrees with him a groomer. That was a big thing like 2 years ago. James Lindsay was going around calling everybody groomer. It's like, well, like if this is really as bad as you say it is, and I believe it's bad, then like shouldn't we not throw that around to just call everybody a groomer? So
I agree
haphazardly.
With you. No, you're absolutely right. I think you like throwing stuff around. It's exactly what people on the right were always saying with the term like racist. Like it's like you get called a racist enough time, it's not even, it doesn't even mean anything, right? So you shouldn't be just using some like very hyperly charged words for people. And it is interesting, because I don't know if you would probably expect this, is that me and Chase know each other pretty well. Obviously, we both live in Atlanta. I've been to Chase's house, but we vehemently disagree on a lot of things, and a lot of the things that have to do with these types of things. But this kind of is the split we see among libertarians in a lot of ways. There is a left-right dichotomy, but me and Chase have had a lot of these conversations offline, and I don't think that he's. I don't like just using because he thinks that something that I think is wrong, like in Drag Queen Story Hour. I don't think that it's right to be calling somebody a pedophile if that person has never.
But
actually
I say the same things about drag queens, like I mean, people on Twitter do call me those names, but like I guess I get it less than Chase probably does because
he's getting it now, and this is the thing is he stepped in the ring, and this was gonna happen, and I knew it was gonna happen if he got the nomination.
Yeah, and I do want to say, which is a controversial opinion, I actually don't think that nudity in and of itself is sexual. So I don't, and like there is a difference, right? Like there are nude beaches in Europe where people have their children, and it's totally normal and it's totally fine. And like nudity is not seen in the same way it is in puritanical United States, so they see it differently. It's not this inherent sexual thing. I think that this is a very American thing. Like Americans are obsessed with sex. And I do think it stems from this like puritanical roots. And I think we integrate everything with sex a lot of times. Even our commercials, it'll be about chocolate and it's just like sexy for some reason.
Well, it's
like,
funny.
Everything.
Americans have a tolerance for violence and Europeans have a tolerance for nudity. We like they're horrified by the shit we show our kids in terms of like gunfights and fucking explosions and things. And we're just like, what are you talking about? That's fine. That's just make believe.
It reminds me of that movie Euro Trip. Have you seen that movie? Early 2000s, when he's like wanting to go to Europe for the sex experience because America was founded by prudes. That's exactly what he says. He's like, America was founded by prudes, so I want to go back to my homeland to claim my birthright.
And I've had this argument a lot though, like that people think that I don't think nudity is inherently sexual. Like it cannot be, and it's not always bad.
I mean, the children of nudist families tend to be be very normal. They tend to not be nudists, but they do tend to be fine. They're just like, yeah, my parents were fucking weird.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I just think it's a little odd to expose your child to naked strangers, and like you said,
but that's because it's not culturally normal.
It's a cultural, it's culture.
Well, and what is considered full-on nudity, right? Like, I mean, most places they have like topless beaches and stuff like that, but full nude beaches, generally kids don't go to full nude beaches, and so it's like tops okay, bottoms not. And you're right though, there is some things that I don't think that people consider to be inherently sexual, and other people would. Like you said, you could take your kids to the beach. People in swimsuits is not inherently sexual, but I think if you take a child to like Hooters, that is inherently sexual. So
also, I was
people all across America take their kids to fucking Hooters,
and I don't agree with that. Most people,
I was obsessed with Britney Spears when I was in 4th grade, and like Britney Spears, everything about Britney Spears was sexual at that time, and anyone who tries to say that she wasn't is full of shit. I know.
I mean, she made out with Madonna.
I was obsessed with her when I was in like kindergarten.
Oh my god!
But
okay,
that actually sells the point. That sells the point.
That's I know exactly.
It
like
does.
like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera. Like, oh my, what is that song? Genie in the Bottle. You gotta rub me the right way. I loved that song when that was Christina Aguilera, and I loved.
Yeah, but I
loved that song when I was in 5th grade. I had no fucking idea what it meant, but I loved it. And like, this is what I mean, where it's like at least for millennials, it's kind of funny. Like, I feel like our whole culture was very sexualized. Like, of all of our art and all of like the things.
I will say it was pretty bad growing up. Yes. I mean, I'm an elder millennial myself.
Fine.
So yeah, I mean,
right?
there was a lot of, this was like the revolution of the internet. This was like everything was coming out at the same time. But the one thing that was really weird is, we had AOL chat rooms, and it was like, don't talk to strangers.
Oh my
Be
God.
wary, you're probably not talking to a real person. And now we just like are meeting people on dating apps. It's kind of crazy.
I definitely put myself in some sauce situations when I was a kid, though. On the internet,
there was a meme, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it says, so I'm going to butcher it. But I think it said something to the degree of like, when we were kids, we were told, don't talk to strangers. And then now in 2020, 2023, now we get in a car with strangers, and pay them to do it or something.
Well, I think it's like when we were kids, we were told, don't talk to strangers, don't meet strange people off the internet, don't take candy from people. And now we're getting Uber Eats, we're getting Uber, we're meeting people on dating apps, and it's literally everything that we were warned against.
Well, I mean, so far we've turned out fine. So far.
Yeah, so far. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. I do think there is some of the stuff is a little overblown, and a lot of people don't really see the nuance of how, like, people are like, oh my God, you take your child to a drag queen story hour and they're going to be ruined for life, or they call that child abuse. I'm like, okay, you're getting like in the weeds here. Yeah. But I think that as we've discussed, like taking a child to like a Britney Spears concert was pretty sexual. Like, I don't know. I think that, but my nuance.
So is after our hour and 42-minute dialogue, the answer is life's complicated and there's no easy answers.
Yeah,
we got it. We figured it.
It took us almost 2 hours to get to that. And
I think that's kind of important though, because I would say like Rin, you're more progressive. Kyle's more conservative. I'm probably like middle of the road here. I don't know. Like, and I think
you're probably closer to the less conservative side, I would say.
Really? Okay, Rin, do you agree with that?
I mean,
because I feel like Rin would think I'm conservative. So
because you live in fucking Somerville, Massachusetts, bro. You're a relative conservative, and overall progressive.
Oh, I'm a Massachusetts conservative.
So yeah,
I'm a Pennsylvania leftist.
Yeah, everything's
yeah.
You're Pennsylvania.
Yeah, because keep in mind here I'm a centrist, and people are like, "You're the problem with America." I'm like, bro, I'm the token leftist.
They look at you as a prude, essentially.
They think that I have very like right-leaning tendencies.
That's hilarious.
Whoever says
God,
that is
I'd
crazy.
be a fucking Nazi.
I know, because that's what I tell people. I'm like, I'm the token leftist on a fucking podcast, but it's because I have palatable views.
Well, I mean, I do think that like for most, we're probably both relatively moderate, but like to conservatives, they don't think that about us. So it is relative to who you talk to. But the reason why I liked having this conversation is because we kind of got, it's not just this is all bad, this is all good, praising it or shaming it. It's kind of just a nuanced discussion on like on it, like actually having the conversation without there being so like tense and angry, because I feel like everything is either like one way or the other, and there's not a lot of just like nuanced dialogue here.
Nuanced dialogue doesn't sell like blood sports does, unfortunately.
I know people like blood sports. We'll never be famous, guys, but that's okay.
I mean, it's the friends we made along the way, right?
What are you talking about?
No. You guys will be famous. You guys had me on, so get ready.
Yes. We get to take some of that Sara clout now.
we did have a little bit of a audience here that wasn't very friendly. I think it was the polyamory episode that we did.
Oh, and Katie came on. They got real
everybody,
rowdy.
We were all considered degens, and I'm like, married. I've been with the same woman for over 5 years.
I'm engaged. I'm having a baby now.
The only sexual degenerates I can safely point out is parents.
No. Oh, what?
Well, they're the only ones that you can definitively say they're fucking at least once.
Okay, fair enough.
Everyone else is fashion, bro. Anyway, let's
Sara, give where people can find you and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, here on YouTube, you can find me. Just go. It's Sara Higdon's the channel. And then on Twitter and Instagram, it's Sara Higdon with an _ after it. But actually, you can find like all my op-eds, articles, and stuff on my website, which is just sarahhigdon.com. And all my links are on there too. I'm everywhere.
Woo!
I'm like J-Lo.
Yes. Sara on the block. Wait, how does it go?
I'm still Jenny from the block.
Yes, Sara from the block. All right. Kyle, what's your stuff?
I'll try to keep it pretty short, but I think next week I'm having Savvy Sabs from the Revolutionary Blackout Network on, so feel free to check that on my channel. Same deal, YouTube everywhere, Comatovic on Twitter. A Common Crown will be opening up for Hinder on June 30th, as well as playing Rock for Life June 28th. So if you're in the southwestern Pennsylvania area, please feel free to come out. And then 5 till midnight's Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I think that's all my plugs.
Sick.
We did an episode 0 of a spin-off podcast, and the production quality was too low. Brandy yelled at me, so
we're bad.
We're gonna try again with some better equipment.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that.
Yeah, thank you.
At some point here. And I am pregnant. That's what I have going on right now, and I haven't been streaming much.
Got a
and I'm
fuck trophy growing in there.
Oh God. Okay, and I haven't been streaming that much because I have been very sick. I actually got sick before this podcast. I am struggling, and it's supposed to stop soon. Allegedly, everyone tells me second trimester. It's beautiful. It's going to be amazing. Best time of your life. I can't wait. I hope it starts soon because I don't know how much longer I can handle this. So I'm gonna try to stream tonight, but we don't know. We won't know. I won't know, and I don't know what's gonna happen in the next hour. The fact I made it this long is actually like
we're so proud of you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. I deserve something. A gold star.
I wish my
I'll crack a truly in your honor.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we'll be back next week, I think. And then Porkfest is coming up. I don't know if any libertarian or liberty-leaning homies are coming to New Hampshire, but come to Porkfest. It's cool and super fun.
We're not going this year. We'll be at Freedom Fest though.
I don't think I'll be at Freedom Fest, but
Freedom Fest is so insanely expensive.
Yeah, that's why I don't think I'm gonna go. But oh well. All right. Bye everyone. Maybe I'll stream later, maybe not. We'll see. Bye.